Good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be. I'm David Hunt, owner of Gamemasters Guild, your host for The Art of the Master. I'd like to welcome you to my first full-on episode of The Art of the Master, and while trying to decide what topic to start with, well, there was an infinite number of possibilities, and I got excited about all sorts of different topics. But then I thought, I need to kind of trim it back and just start with something basic. And I thought about what people usually ask me when they come in the store when they're interested in running their first game. And so instantly right there, I knew I had the contents for my first episode. And that is simply enough. Mistakes new game masters make. And that's going to be the title of our episode today. Mistakes that new game masters or dungeon masters make. Now, just because you're an experienced dungeon master doesn't mean that you're going to not make any of these mistakes. Trust me, even I make these mistakes, and more than I probably care to admit. But as you'll come to see, a lot of these things on this list, it's pretty easy for the new guy and the experienced veteran to fall victim to. So let's go jump right in, shall we? And let's look at the first mistake new game masters frequently make. And that is, starting before you're ready. In the excitement to run your own role-playing game, you rush through the books, you gather everything you need, you tell everybody to meet you at a certain date or time, or you guys agree upon a time. You sit and you play and you got a few ideas, or you quick write an idea out, or you've got a module and you sit down and play, and then the rest of the night just goes haywire. You spend more time looking up rules and arguing about decisions, or there's a lot of dead time while you're flipping through a module trying to figure out what's next. Or the game has to get cut short early because of your lack of preparation. Well, I gotta tell you, I've definitely done this before. And for about 2 years, I ran one-shots in the store every Thursday for about 4 or 5 hours. And that's not counting my personal games on top of that, as well as when certain events would come around, like Free RPG Day. So I noticed very quickly, by trying to run these one-shots in my store, that I couldn't just grab it, quick skim the rules, sit down and play. I had to do just a little bit more research than that. And I consider myself a very, very experienced game master. And lots of time under my belt, done a lot of different things. But I noticed that I couldn't just grab the book off the shelf, skim it in 5 or 10 minutes, jot down some notes, and go. I can do this, but I've noticed the game suffers. And I have to be a little more creative, I have to be a little more quick on my feet, and sometimes I get backed into a corner, story-wise, where I kind of don't know what to do next. Usually I can improv my way out of it, but it's definitely not as comfortable as if I'd given myself just a little bit more time to prepare. And when you're running a role-playing game, it's all about interactive storytelling and about everybody having fun, and you want to have as much fun as your players are having. So why make yourself sweat? Why make it more work than necessary? So really what you want to do is make sure you know the rules of the game. Make sure you know the game world. So whatever game you're getting ready to run, be it your first game, or maybe you're an experienced GM and you've got a new game that you want your players to try, you want to have a solid idea of the game world. You want to be able to explain it to them. And sometimes it helps if you can latch it on to maybe a TV series or movie series, something that players are pretty familiar with, or explain it in such a way that it doesn't take you 20 minutes to explain the game world. You should be able to explain it in just a few sentences. So you want to be able to explain the game world real simply to your players so they got a clear idea, because you may be very experienced with it, or you may have a solid idea what it is, but if they've never seen anything even remotely like that, you got to make sure to give them a good, clear idea of that setting so they've got something to latch onto. They don't have to understand the entire game world, but they have to have a good, solid concept for that setting. Pick any movie or TV show out there. Try and pick a few and try to sit there and distill the very essence of that setting in just a couple sentences. And that will help you out trying to tell people about the game world. So anyways, you want to make sure your players know what the game world is. What is the setting? Next thing is, even though with a new game you don't have to memorize every rule, you don't have to memorize every page, you don't have to know every modifier for every situation, but you do need to be able to run the basics. You need to resolve at the most basic level combat encounters and non-combat encounters. The more you play, the more the rest of the rules will become apparent. The more someone wants to use a certain modifier, or you want to try something new, you guys will look up the rules as you go, and you slowly become familiar with the game. Plus, if you have more than one copy of the main book, then that's going to help too, because while you're still running the action, one of your players can be looking up information, and he can also not just look up information for you, but look up information for the players. So when someone asks, perhaps for how much damage a weapon does, or how far he can jump, then one of the other players can take over and look up that rule while you keep the game running. Because nothing kills a role-playing game quicker than not playing. And a little aside real quick, I have literally been here running my store. Someone will come out from the back and I'll ask them, "Hey, how's your game going?" And they'll say, "Well, we're kind of been stalled out. We haven't really been doing a whole lot." And I say, "Oh yeah, what's the trouble?" And I say, "Well, we've been trying to resolve this particular ruling." I was like, "Oh, really? Oh man, how long have you guys been doing that?" 40 minutes. 40 minutes? That's ridiculous. I mean, literally, this has really happened in my store. People will literally pause the game for anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes to resolve a ruling. Look, whatever rules question or ruling you don't know, or rules question that you have, as Game Master, it should take you 5 minutes to make a decision, tops. And basically, the nuts and bolts of it are, well, look, I don't know the exact rule. I don't want to slow down the game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this decision, and we're going to go ahead and keep on playing. And then after the game is over, when we've got more time outside of the game, I'll research it. You guys can help me research it, and we'll figure out how we need to work this rule in the future and be consistent from there on out. Now, when I make these kind of decisions, I do it for a few reasons. First of all, I don't want to stop the game. I want people to come back and play my games. So the quicker I can get back to the action, the better. Plus, no one wants to sit around and do nothing while you're looking up rules. Even if they're looking up rules, everybody wants to play. I mean, when you set aside time to role play, you only have so much time. So why eat up 20 or 40 minutes of that time, especially if you can only get together for 4 hours, let's say? Why would you waste that time looking up rules? And so far, everyone I've played with, and I've played with a lot of different people, just not my personal friends, but a lot of people outside of my, you could say, inner circle, I suppose, of gamers. And I tell you, this works. I say, look, I'm not sure about this rule, but I don't want to pause the action too long. This is what I'm going to say, and then in between game sessions, we're going to go ahead and figure out what the outcome of this is and how we need to handle it in the future, and then we'll do that from there on out. Plus also, usually when I stop and make a decision like that, I have a tendency to err more on the side of the players. So that way, if I make a bad call, basically all that happens is the players just got a little bit more of an extra perk there for a limited time. So again, don't stall the game because you don't know a rule of something. And no matter how many times you've been through a book, when you need to find that rule, it is magically not in there. I'm telling you. Now sometimes, again, you got a couple other players with handbooks hanging around or core books, and they can flip through. Sometimes they figure it out, and then by the time I come back around the table and I look at one of the guys with the books, he goes, "Oh, hey, I found that rule, by the way. This is what it says." Okay. And for people who are worried about, well, what happens if I make a judgment call and it creates an inconsistency in the game? What do I do? Well, running a role-playing game isn't time travel. You're not going to accidentally wipe yourself out of existence. You make a mistake. I can't tell you how many glaring mistakes or inconsistencies I've had in my games. And so sometimes I'm able to loosely explain it, and say, well, that's okay. It's just how it kind of happened. Maybe it's the will of the gods, or, just happened to be a lucky break, but it's probably not going to happen again because the rules say so, Just don't worry about these kind of inconsistencies, because as time goes on and you keep playing, no one else is going to remember and no one else is going to care. As long as you play fair and impartially to your players, you're going to be just fine. So I think I've beat that dead horse pretty good. So let's move on to the next thing. You need to know how to make characters. Whatever game you're getting ready to run, you need to make sure you've made up at least one character for every player. Why? Well, first of all, if someone shows up at the table without a character or shows up with a friend, hey, you've got an extra character sheet to hand out, which is great. But more importantly, you should always make up half a dozen characters, because that's about the average group size. I would say it'd be about 6 maybe. But you know your group better than I do, so make characters accordingly. But I would make characters because they help you navigate the book. They help you learn the rules, because that's how I became very knowledgeable about 5th edition. It's just by making characters. I would make characters constantly, try to remember how to calculate AC or their passive perception or where to find spells. And in the course of doing that, I would catch myself reading more than just what I was looking for in some cases. And then the second reason to make characters is you become familiar with the character classes in the book, and this allows you to balance the game more appropriately for your players when you have an idea of what kind of characters your players could make. And game balance is very important, because you don't want to have a bunch of rogues or sorcerers run roughshod over you. Now, you don't want to sabotage them either, but you want to make it fun for them. And while sometimes it is nice for players to be able to easily walk through enemies or situations they thought were dangerous, it's still nice to be able to prepare situations that are challenging for them. And in addition to that, by having some characters already made, completely fleshed out, you have some pre-made NPCs. So if you need an NPC on the fly, you grab one of those pre-made characters you just did, and you're ready to go. The next thing that's a problem I see for a lot of people, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody, and that's letting in too many players. Now, why is this a problem? Well, what happens is every time you add a player, you add probably on average about 5 minutes of wait time for everybody at that table. If I have, let's say, if I'm a dungeon master and I have 4 people at my table, that's about 5 minutes each of RP approximately per each player, or approximately 5 minutes each for combat. Now, that seems like a long time, and 5 minutes, especially in combat, when you're going from person to person to person, that's pretty quick. but it about averages out to that, give or take. So if I have John, Glenn, Travis, and Josh at my table, so I talk to John for 5 minutes. Now, Josh, at the very end, he's going to wait 15 minutes before I get a chance to talk to him. And that's as long as everything else goes nice and smooth with the other players. Now, John, I might talk to him for 5 minutes. Glenn, I might talk to him for 1 or 2. He might be like, oh, no, I'm good. I'm totally fine. I'm going back to the inn and I'm sleeping. That's it? Yep, that's it. All right, you sure? Yep, okay. So then I move on to Travis. Maybe his takes 10 minutes. And then I come to Josh, and then I resolve Josh's RP. And that's usually how I go. Usually I go in one direction or the other. I alternate, and I make sure everybody gets a little bit of face time. And when you have 4 people, you can see that you can have a lot of wait time. Now, sometimes in the middle of this, sometimes I've gotten to the point to where I can kind of pause one. I can pause while I'm talking to John. I'll say something to Josh real quick that might be pertinent to his character. I was like, oh yeah, and by the way, you noticed this. And then I'll come back to John. And that way, I'm still trying to keep Josh engaged because I know it's going to take a while for me to get around the table and talk to him. But he's still going to experience wait time. Now, if you add 2 more people to that, that's another 10 minutes that Josh might have to wait. If I got 10 people in my game at 5 minutes a person, that's 50 minutes. That's a long time waiting. And even in combat, you could probably average 1 to 2 minutes per person in combat. If you had 10 people, you're still waiting 10 to 20 minutes for it to come back around to your turn. And that's the problem with having too many players, is it slows down the game. Plus, in a larger group, I believe it's harder to keep everybody fully engaged with everybody else's story because there are so many different characters in the group that sometimes it can be difficult to keep the story cohesive, to keep everybody interested in what's going on. So you get a lot of players who are playing, but they're not all in as much as they'd probably like to be or should be. Now, why don't people say no to extra players? Well, why do people have such large groups sometimes? Well, I'll tell you why from personal experience. Because they're my friends. Now, I suppose in the past, at some point, I may have felt obligated to have so many people at my table, but really, in reflection, the real reason why I've had large numbers at my tables is because I just want everybody to come play and have fun. If I'm going to run a game, I want all my friends there to come play and enjoy it. But that's why I want to invite large groups at my table, is because, well, I just want all my friends to come and enjoy the game. I want us all to hang out together and have a good time. And, well, that might be true for those who are there to play somewhat and to socialize a little more. They don't mind it quite so much. And that's fine for them. But for the guys who are there who might want to socialize a little, but who really want to get down to brass tacks and actually play the game, it can be unnerving and annoying. They'll keep coming back night after night, session after session. But for the guys who really want to get into it and play, there's not going to be enough there for them. It's going to be more frustrating than anything else. So letting in too many players can definitely be a problem. And that's just something you're going to have to balance out yourself. And I would recommend, telling people, hey, I'm going to run a game, but I'm only going to need a few players. I mean, you guys can decide amongst yourselves, or ideally, I might even hand pick people to play in a certain game, because I know I got a feeling that certain people here would like to play a certain style of game. Like, I know amongst my friends, not everybody wants to play horror, and I could pretty much tell you on one hand who wants to play a fascinating, investigative, Lovecraftian horror game. And then, even though everybody might want to play a game where they're all members of a military team, I can pretty much tell you who's going to run good in that group and who's not going to mesh so well. But now if I have some kind of post-apocalyptic future where everybody's kind of pseudo-mercenary, then quite frankly, that's most of my players I can put into that. So I could run a larger group. So it's just something you need to remember, just something you need to keep in mind. Who's going to work good in your games, and also too, how slow do you want your game to run? And if you have a lot of people in your game, you got to make sure you are on the ball, because you want to keep those people engaged. You want to keep having fun, and combat is a good way to keep a large group entertained, because then everybody's kind of pitching in, everybody's talking, but you don't always want combat in your game. Group size for me is 3 to 5 people, with that sweet spot being 4, not counting the Dungeon Master, because I think that's the most optimal size group to run. 3, you're clipping along at a good pace. 5, you're a little slower, but it's not bad. 4 is that sweet spot. I really think it's ideal. One final thing about having too many players in a group is the dreaded party split. I hear guys all the time lament to me and say, "Ugh, I cannot believe they split the party. You never ever split the party." And of course I'm right there with them. I hate it when the players split the party. It slows things down, and plus, they're more likely to get killed. But also too, over the years, I've come to try to go against this a little bit. I try not to worry so much about when my players split up. Now, I know a lot of DMs will make it quite clear to the players that they shouldn't split up, and sometimes it's very deadly. But I don't necessarily believe this has to be the case. As long as you got a smaller group, it really shouldn't matter if the players split the party or not. Because you have such a small group, if you're in the sweet spot from 3 to 5 players, then you should be okay if they split up. You should be able to easily handle what they're doing. I mean, quite frankly, I think it's harder when all the players are in one room and you get one player try to do something and he fails, and someone else immediately, "Well, I'll try that." And then you got all those other players there to try to replicate what one player failed at doing. Whereas if a player is by himself, the stakes are higher, and he's got to come through on his own. There's nobody there to catch him. And I like that. I like it when the players split up, because then they're not afraid to go off somewhere by themselves, to take a little risk, to take a little chance. They got a chance to meet a shady character on their own. I think the element of risk, as well as the chance for role-playing, is just exponential, and I think it's great when the players split. Of course, it is a lot easier when they stay all together, trust me. But of course, party split can be a little problematic to deal with. And if you got 10 people, I guarantee you a third of those people are going to go off. And even if that's only 3 out of 10, that's still 3 people going completely sideways to your game. And plus, the larger group of people you have, the more likely you're going to catch that one guy who he's there more casually and he just thinks it's fun. He's not necessarily trying to derail your game or just be stupid in your game just to mess with you, but he's just like, "I'm just going to go do this," because he's more there for the social setting, and he's more there just because he's just kind of a wild card. He's just there to kind of have fun. But if you're not running that kind of game, if you're trying to run a game that's a little more, I don't want to necessarily say serious, but a game where you're not just basically goofing off the whole time, it can be kind of a problem, and it can pull players right out of the game, and it can make you not have as much fun as you'd like to have. Of course, it can be very difficult to tell players that, you don't want too many players in your group. I would definitely tell them, "Hey, I'm running a certain kind of game, and I want to keep my game to a certain number of people." My third topic for today is allowing characters, classes, and abilities from source books either you don't have, or if you do, that you are not familiar with. And this is a big one. I see it happen all the time. I had a gentleman in my shop who was saying he was very, very excited to be running 3.5 for his friends. I was like, oh, that's great. And he said, and I told him, all my players are excited. I told them they can make up any character they want from any source book. And everybody's just stoked, and they're breaking in their source books, and they're seeing what they can make. They're super excited. And I was like, hey, that's really great. I'm happy for you. That's awesome. I'm like, yep, sure do. I'm going to have 4 players. It's going to be perfect. Oh, that's awesome. So, and then in the course conversation, I asked him how long he's been playing. Come to find out, he's just starting to run 3.5. He picked up the books last week, and he's telling everybody to pick whatever characters they want from whatever system they want. Now that's a problem, because how can you run a balanced game for your players if you're not even familiar with the characters that they're going to be running? Now, in hindsight, I don't know if he would look at the characters before they were going to play just to get a final approval on them. But then again, I got a feeling that this wasn't going to be the case. And that's something you have to be very careful of, allowing players to make races and character classes from source books that you don't have or that you don't know, because they may make something that completely derails your story. The presence of a certain character race could completely make the story you're trying to tell completely pointless. Or maybe a certain character's abilities could make almost all your villains useless. And at first, that might seem awesome for the players, but it's going to be bad for you, because if they can waltz through everything super easy, then there's no challenge for the players. Now, a good game master can work this and alter it and not get too bent out of shape, and just condense this story down and let them walk through the story, make it as challenging as you reasonably can, but blow through this section. And then when you come up with a new story, then you change it to where it's a little more challenging with that player who has that character class or race that makes it a little more unbalanced, and balance it out. But I see that a lot, and I've done that too, even with things like rifts, where you can pretty much play any character from any other game systems because they have their own megaversal game system, and you could port in characters from Dead Rain, Platinum Fantasy RPG, Rifts, Robotech, and generally that's not a problem. And when I run Rifts, I got people wanting to do all sorts of stuff, and usually I hand wave and say, yeah, sure, just make whatever you want. But sometimes that can be a big problem. It's not so bad if you take time to review the characters that your players have made right before the game, so that way you can kind of anticipate some potential problems down the road. But even experienced gamers fall into this trap and let players make stuff that they're not even ready for. So before you allow a player to make up a character with a certain race, a certain class, you're going to want to know about that before the game actually starts running. And one final thing I'm going to touch into just real quick, I'm just going to make a casual mention of it, is that I've had a tendency to do it in the past, and I've been correcting myself for years now, and I still have a tendency to sometimes do it. But I see this all the time with other DMs, and that is they make every combat encounter challenging and to the death. That doesn't seem very realistic the more I look at it. When you're fighting hordes of undead or mindless zombies, well, yes, it's pretty much going to be to the death. Yes, it's going to be very challenging. But in many instances, you're going to be dealing with other intelligent creatures, or even non-intelligent creatures, who are going to value their own existence. And they're not necessarily going to fight to the death. Only the most fanatical, crazed, or mindless creatures or servants are going to do this. And not every combat encounter should be deadly to your players. There should always be that sense of, because since the players don't know the abilities and powers and skills of the enemy, you should be able to run that encounter and make little hints and suggestions that make the enemy seem more powerful than they really are, even though they might be woefully inadequate to fight your players and your players are really in no danger. But by presenting the bad guys in such a way, you can make a low-level group of even just bandits, let's say, who aren't really a threat to your players, make them seem very dangerous to your players. But yet, still allow your players to roll those guys over and still allow your players to feel like they were potentially in danger, but only upon reflection, they're like, whew, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Yeah, high five, we did a good job. But you definitely do not want to make every encounter to where your players feel it's deadly and that they might not get out, because that gets old. That gets old. Only a few super critical encounters should be at this level of intensity. Not to say a regular combat can't bring them near death or kill some players off or potentially have a party wipe. It's just one of those things that very well could happen in the course of running a role-playing game. In the course of combat, things go sideways. But generally speaking, as a DM, you should not make every encounter life and death, because not every encounter is going to be. And remember, your players, even at level 1, they should technically still be the cream of the crop of whatever world they're in. They're the players, they're the main characters. So anyways, I could take any of these topics and continue to talk and elaborate on them, but I think I'm going to end it right here and save some material for another episode. And right now I've got a lot of thoughts and ideas rattling around in my head. I don't want to get off too far on a tangent. So I hope you enjoyed this first episode of The Art of the Master, and please be on the lookout for future episodes. If you have any ideas for me or something you want to see sooner rather than later, please be sure to comment below, and make sure to share this with your friends, especially if they themselves are running role-playing games, especially if they're new. Again, I'm your host, David Hunt, owner of Gamemasters Guild, and I'd like to thank you again for stopping by and checking out The Art of the Master. Remember to stay safe, play great games, and I'll see you real soon.